What happens when the people you love the most decide there's no room for you at their table? That question haunted me like a whisper in the cold silence of December. The holidays were always sacred to me. Not because of the traditions or the glittering lights, but because they were one of the few times a year when love felt like a physical thing. You could taste it in the cinnamon cookies, hear it in the laughter over hot cider, and see it glowing in every pair of eyes seated around a dinner table. That was the Christmas I had always known. Or so I thought. Until one year, the season turned from comfort to cruelty. My name is Irene. I'm 72, and for most of my life, I've lived by the ocean, in a modest house with peeling white paint and a porch that always smells like salt and pine. My husband, the love of my life, passed away 8 years ago. Since then, it's just been me and my 2 cats, Patch and Moon, living quietly beside the sea, wrapped in memory and the sound of waves. That Christmas, my son Nathan had invited me to spend the holiday with him and his wife, Camille. I'd been hesitant. Camille came from money, from people who served seafood on silver and held their wine like it was a glass of status. I was a teacher for over 40 years, simple, practical, not flashy. My life was one of quiet joys and secondhand sweaters, not cocktail parties and private chefs. But Nathan had asked, and for him, I would always say yes. I spent days choosing the right gift, wrapping it with shaking fingers and an ache in my heart I couldn't name. I baked my husband's favorite pecan shortbread to bring. And then, the phone call came. "We've talked about it," Camille said, her voice smooth but cold. "You just don't really fit in with my family's holiday. It's better if you stay home this year." I stood there, phone pressed to my ear, the gift ribbon still dangling in my hand. She didn't yell. She didn't insult me directly. But that was almost worse. Her words were delivered with surgical precision. Clean, polite, and devastating. "And Nathan?" He said nothing. His silence, heavy and hollow, was louder than any rejection. "I'm sorry, Mom. It's just better this way." That night, I didn't cry. Not right away. I set the cookies down, untouched. I stroked Moon's fur until my hand went numb. The tree lights blinked like little reminders of the family I no longer had. I told myself I was fine. That I'd made peace with being alone. But I hadn't. Not really. Hours passed, maybe days, I don't even remember, until the phone rang again. It was Lillian, my best friend from college, the kind of woman who knew how to turn tears into laughter with one sentence. "We're coming over," she said, voice firm. "Don't argue. We're bringing food and wine. And don't you dare turn off those twinkle lights." By sundown, my little house was alive again. Lillian brought her famous spinach quiche. Marta arrived with her grandkids and a toy train set. Even Jasper, the grumpy widower from across the lane, came by in his slippers with a bottle of sherry. And as we sat around the table, laughing, eating, remembering, I felt something I hadn't felt since the day my husband passed. Loved. And that's when I mentioned the house. "My plan was always to leave it to Nathan," I said quietly, tracing my fingers along a coffee mug. "It was supposed to be his one day. But now, I don't know." The room went quiet. "You don't owe him anything, Irene," Lillian said gently. "Not after what he did." Those words hit harder than they should have. Because they were true. I had spent my life giving. As a mother. A wife. A teacher. But I had never really asked, what do I deserve? And for the first time, I wasn't sure the answer included Nathan. The morning after that unexpected gathering, the house was quiet again. But this time, it wasn't the crushing silence of rejection. It was the heavy calm before a decision. A choice. One that would change everything. I stood at the window, coffee in hand, watching the sea foam curl along the shore. The house was bathed in that soft, cold winter light that made everything feel suspended in time. And I thought about the will. The one I had written years ago, after my husband passed. The one that named Nathan as the sole heir to the home we built with love, penny by penny, nail by nail. It had never crossed my mind to question it. He was my son, my only child. Of course it would be his. That's just what mothers do, right? But then Camille's voice echoed in my mind again. You don't fit in with my family. And Nathan's silence, oh, that silence, was like a knife that never stopped twisting. Suddenly, the thought of him walking these floors after I was gone, of her sipping champagne on my porch, surrounded by things they'd stolen from me not in action but in apathy, made me feel ill. I felt like a ghost in my own story, watching the ending be rewritten without my permission. I pulled out the will that afternoon. It was still in the cedar box under my bed, wrapped in the same ribbon I'd tied around it when I first signed it. Funny how we try to preserve things that were meant to change. I held the pen in my hand. It trembled. Not with fear. With something else. Resolve. But before I could put ink to paper, the phone rang again. This time, it was Marta. Did you do it? She asked, skipping any polite lead-in. Not yet, I admitted. Well, I've got something that might help. Her voice was practically buzzing. Remember my cousin Nina? The one who's a real estate agent now? She's helping this widow in her 80s, Eloise something, who just sold her big lake house. Turns out, Eloise rewrote her will the day after her daughter-in-law called her a burden. She sold the house, bought an RV, and now she's traveling the country with a golden retriever and a yoga mat. I laughed, really laughed, for the first time in weeks. Maybe you don't need an RV, Marta said with a wink in her voice. But maybe you need to remember that house isn't just a roof. It's a life. Yours. That night, I sat by the fire with Moon curled against my side and Patch snoring under the coffee table. I thought about every Christmas Nathan had spent in this house, his tiny hands leaving frosting fingerprints on the windows, his laugh echoing down the hallway, the way he used to call it, Mom's Castle by the Sea. And then I thought about how quickly he'd left me behind. I couldn't change him. I couldn't reach into his heart and pull out the boy I raised. But I could protect myself. And I could protect this home. That night, I wrote a new will. And in that moment, something inside me shifted. I was no longer waiting to be chosen. I was choosing myself. There's a strange thing that happens when you take your power back. At first, it feels invigorating, like fresh air after a storm. You stand taller. Breathe deeper. Your voice doesn't shake as much when you speak. But then, when reality sinks in, it hits you like a rogue wave. You start to wonder if you've gone too far. If maybe, just maybe, it wasn't as bad as it felt in the moment. Doubt creeps in like fog, settling in the corners of your confidence. That's where I was a week later, when the knock came. It was from Thomas, my longtime attorney. Now, Thomas had been part of my life for over a decade. He knew everything, from the quirks of my garden sprinkler system to the story behind the piano in the living room. My late husband and I had trusted him implicitly. I had expected him to handle my revised will with grace and discretion. So when he called one rainy Tuesday and said, "Irene, we need to talk. Something's off," I felt the earth shift under my feet. I met him in his office, which smelled like old leather and desperation. He looked tired, older somehow. He avoided my eyes as he shuffled through papers like they might vanish before he had to explain them. "Your son's been coming in," he finally admitted. "Asking for changes." I stared at him, frozen. "What do you mean changes?" He didn't answer right away. Just pushed a document toward me, my document, except it wasn't the version I'd signed. It had been tampered with. Rewritten. Quietly. Behind my back. By my own son. "He told me you were getting forgetful," Thomas said, barely above a whisper. "Said he was just helping you." I didn't question it. I could feel my pulse in my throat. "You didn't question it?" "Irene, I'm sorry. Truly. I never meant." But I wasn't listening anymore. My heart was thudding in my ears. Not just because of Thomas. But because of what it meant. Nathan had tried to erase me. Not confront me. Not ask me. Just take. Quietly. Like a thief in the night. Like I didn't matter. I left that office without another word. I didn't cry in the car. I didn't scream. I just drove, aimlessly, winding through the streets of my town like a ghost. Every stoplight, every familiar landmark felt like it belonged to a life I no longer recognized. At one point, I found myself at a small cafe where I used to take Nathan for hot cocoa after school. They still had the same mismatched chairs, the same chalkboard menu with its curling corners. I sat in the corner booth, the one by the window, and tried to feel something besides rage. The waitress, young, red hair, kind eyes, noticed my hands shaking as I stirred my tea. "You okay, sweetheart?" she asked. I nodded. But I wasn't. Because this wasn't just about property. Or paper. Or even betrayal. This was about identity. About being told that your love, your life, your sacrifice, it's all disposable. That you're only worth what you leave behind. That day, I made two decisions. 1, would find a new lawyer. 2, Nathan would never get his hands on that house. Not ever. Not while I was still breathing. The morning I walked into Richard's office, the air smelled of fresh coffee and determination. He was younger than Thomas by at least 2 decades, with sharp eyes and a focused calm that reminded me of my husband when he was fixing something, a leaky faucet, a broken heart, a future. "I read your email," he said, gesturing to a seat. "And if even half of what you wrote is true, Irene, we're going to make this right." Those words, simple as they were, unlocked something in me. For weeks, I had been carrying my fury like a second skin, thick and prickly. But now, I had someone in my corner. Someone who didn't just pity me, but believed me. We got to work immediately. Richard dove into every document with the precision of a surgeon. We dug out every email, every revision, every shred of evidence showing how Thomas, under Nathan's pressure, had altered the original will. There was even a voicemail I hadn't realized I'd saved, from Nathan. "Mom, it's just the house. You don't even need it. Camille and I could give it the life it deserves." As if the memories etched into the floorboards, the love baked into the kitchen walls, the tears I cried into the fabric of the living room couch, they didn't count. But they did count. Every inch of that house was my life story. While Richard prepared the legal case, I found myself preparing something else, my spirit. I started walking the beach again every morning, bundled in my coat, cheeks stinging from the cold. I greeted the gulls. Picked up driftwood. Let the sea remind me who I was before I became just someone's mom. One day, I ran into Jasper, yes, the grumpy widower with the sherry. He was sitting on a bench with a thermos of coffee and a sketchpad in his lap. "You're out early," he said, not looking up. "So are you." He shrugged. "Wife used to love mornings like this. I come to remember her." I sat down beside him. We talked for an hour, about memories, regrets, the strangeness of growing older and feeling invisible. He told me how his son stopped visiting after Jasper refused to sell the family store. Said it was just property. Just. We understood each other. "You're not wrong to fight for that house," he said quietly before I left. "You're fighting for something bigger. They won't see it until they lose it." Later that week, Nathan called. His voice was tight, like he was trying to wrap it in civility but couldn't hide the strain. "I heard you hired a new lawyer." "I did. You know this isn't what Dad would have wanted." Ah. There it was. The guilt. I closed my eyes and let the pain roll over me like a tide. "Don't use him against me, Nathan," I said, voice even. "He's not here to correct your memory." He didn't reply for a long time. And then, softly, "If you don't change it back, I'll go to court." "I know. You really want this to be how we end things? I want you to remember that you started this." And I hung up. I'd been pushed to the edge, but I wasn't falling. I was climbing. The courthouse stood like a relic of judgment, tall and unmoved by the dramas that unfolded within its stone walls. That day, it was my turn to step into its silence and be heard. The morning was gray, fitting. Even the sky seemed unsure of how this would end. Richard met me outside, briefcase in hand, expression steady. "You ready?" he asked. "No," I said honestly. "But I'm going anyway." Inside, the courtroom was packed tighter than I expected. Nathan and Camille sat at the far end, dressed like a magazine ad, he in a dark suit he'd never owned as a boy, she in pearl earrings that probably cost more than my car. Their faces were masks, smooth, unreadable. But I could feel the tension in the room vibrating off them like static. The judge, a woman with steel-gray hair and eyes sharp as broken glass, called things to order. Richard opened the case with elegance, poise, and truth. He told the story of a mother who had trusted the wrong people. A woman whose intentions had been rewritten, whose words were stolen by those she once held closest. He detailed how Thomas had amended the will without proper consent, how Nathan manipulated the process through deceit and quiet force. And then, Thomas took the stand. It was strange, watching someone I had once trusted shrink under the weight of his guilt. He admitted everything. Every change. Every moment he'd turned his back on what he knew was right. "I thought I was helping," he said quietly, eyes darting toward me but never landing. I didn't realize how far I'd fallen until it was too late. I believed him. And yet, that belief didn't erase what had been done. Then, it was my turn. The walk to the witness stand felt longer than it was. My knees ached with every step, but I stood tall. I looked at the judge. Then at Nathan. My son. My only child. And I spoke. "I didn't come here to punish anyone," I began. "I came here because I deserve to be seen. Heard. Respected. That house isn't just a piece of land. It's my life. My marriage. My grief. My healing. It's the only thing I've been able to hold onto since the day I lost my husband." I paused. My voice trembled, but I didn't let it falter. What hurts the most isn't that Nathan tried to take the house. It's that he tried to erase me to do it. The room was silent. Even Camille, who hadn't looked away from her phone since we began, seemed to pause. The judge nodded slowly. After closing arguments, the court adjourned for deliberation. We were told to await the ruling within the week. As we filed out, Nathan brushed past me without a word. Camille followed, her heels clicking against the marble-like punctuation. Richard turned to me. "Whatever happens," he said, "you did the right thing." But that night, when I went home, the silence was heavier than ever. I curled up on the couch, the fireplace crackling beside me, moon resting against my chest. I didn't feel like a victor. I felt like a mother mourning a son who was still alive, but no longer hers. Until the phone rang. It was Lillian. "I heard," she said. "You were magnificent." "I'm exhausted." "I know. But proud too, right?" I didn't answer. I wasn't sure yet. She added gently, "Sometimes, protecting your heart means standing up to the people who once lived in it." That night, I stared at the ceiling for hours. Because I wasn't just fighting for a house. I was fighting for my dignity. And dignity, I was learning, doesn't always come with applause. When the call came, it was a Thursday afternoon, the kind of day when the sun can't decide if it wants to shine or sulk behind the clouds. I was sitting in the kitchen, peeling an orange, the radio humming softly in the background. The kind of mundane peace that only exists in moments suspended between anticipation and dread. My phone lit up, Judge Harper's office. My hand hovered over the screen, breath shallow. And then I answered. "Miss Irene," the clerk said, polite but efficient. "The judge has reached a decision. She requests your presence in court tomorrow for the final ruling." I stared at the orange in my hand, its peel curled like a question mark. This was it. The next morning, I dressed in navy, the same dress I wore to my retirement party. It wasn't about formality. It was about memory. That dress reminded me of who I was, a woman who had spent decades pouring into others. A woman who had earned the right to take up space. At the courthouse, Richard met me with a nod. No speeches this time. Just quiet solidarity. The courtroom was colder than before, like even the building knew what today meant. Nathan and Camille sat stone-faced. She tapped her nails against the bench. He stared straight ahead. No acknowledgement. No remorse. Then Judge Harper entered. She didn't drag it out. "I have reviewed all submitted documents, testimonies, and supporting materials," she said, her voice carrying authority. "It is clear the original intentions of the testator, Ms. Irene Carlyle, were improperly altered. The amended will stands. The house and all associated assets remain in her name." A pause. "And this ruling is final." She struck the gavel. Sharp. Unmistakable. The courtroom didn't erupt. No gasps. No cheers. Just the sound of pages turning and lives quietly changing. Nathan's head dropped slightly. Camille's jaw clenched. Richard squeezed my shoulder. "We did it," he said. But I didn't feel like cheering. Because justice is rarely sweet. It's often just necessary. Back home, the house felt different. Not louder. Not fuller. Just mine again. I stood in the living room, watching sunlight filter through the curtains. I ran my hand along the piano lid, dusty, untouched, and remembered my husband's hands dancing across those keys, how he'd hum Sinatra while I stirred stew. That night, I lit a fire. Sat with a glass of wine. And for the first time in months, I wasn't planning. I wasn't fighting. I was being. But even as peace settled around me, something deeper stirred. Not grief. Not victory. Something quieter. Loneliness. And then the phone rang. "Mom?" The voice on the other end cracked just slightly. It was Nathan. I heard the ruling," he said, uncertain. I didn't expect it to feel like this." I didn't answer right away. He continued, "I don't know if it matters now, but I'm sorry. For everything." Silence. "Can we talk?" My throat tightened. My heart, that traitorous old thing, ached in a way I thought I'd closed off. "I don't know if we can fix it," I said slowly, truthfully. "But maybe we can try." And just like that, something shifted. Hope didn't crash in like a wave. It dripped through the cracks like light. Later, I sat by the fire again, holding the phone long after the call ended. The house was still mine. But maybe, just maybe, there was still space for healing too. Spring crept in slowly that year, with shy yellow blossoms along the dunes and the kind of light that warms your bones without you realizing it. The kind that whispers, "It's okay to start again." It had been 3 months since the court ruling. 3 months since I stood up for myself in a way I never had before. 3 months since that call from Nathan cracked open the silence that had grown like ice between us. And since then, things hadn't been perfect. But they had been different. We started small. A Sunday phone call. Then a coffee at a local cafe, the one he used to love as a boy for its cinnamon rolls the size of his head. Camille didn't come. She never did. I think, in her own way, she'd made peace with not being a part of my life. Or perhaps she hadn't, but accepted that I was no longer willing to shrink just to fit her comfort. Nathan, though, he showed up. He didn't bring excuses. He brought questions. "Why didn't you ever say no to me when I was younger?" he asked one afternoon as we walked the shoreline, gulls wheeling overhead. "Because I didn't know how," I answered, voice soft. "I thought that was love. Saying yes, always." He didn't respond right away. Then he whispered, "I think I took that for granted." We walked in silence after that, not needing to fill every space. And that, too, felt like healing. One day, Nathan showed up at my door holding a photo album I hadn't seen in decades, leather-bound, fraying at the corners, heavy with years. "I found this when we were cleaning the garage," he said. "Thought maybe we could look at it, together." We sat on the porch for hours flipping through the pages. His kindergarten graduation. Our road trip to Maine. My husband, sunburned and smiling beside a trout he could barely hold. "I forgot how happy we were," Nathan murmured. "Me too," I admitted. That night, after he left, I stared at the album again. And I realized something. The most valuable things we leave behind aren't houses, or money, or even traditions. They're stories. Their time. Their forgiveness. So, I made another decision. 1 week later, I invited 4 high school girls from the local shelter to tour the house, young women trying to rebuild their lives after family broke them down. They asked questions, eyes wide, as I showed them the garden, the reading nook I'd made from driftwood and blankets, the attic filled with forgotten art supplies. "I was thinking of starting a foundation," I told them. "A place for girls like you. Somewhere to rest. To create. To learn how to say no, and how to say yes to themselves." One of them, a shy girl named Evie, blinked at me. "Why are you doing this?" she asked. I looked around at the house. At the sea beyond. At the life I'd reclaimed. "Because I nearly gave this place away to someone who didn't see its worth," I said. "And I don't want to make that mistake again. Not with this. Not with you." Later, when I told Nathan, he didn't look hurt. He looked proud. "I get it, Mom," he said. "I think Dad would have too." That night, as I stood on the porch, watching the moonlight shimmer across the waves, I realized this wasn't just the ending of a chapter. It was the beginning of a legacy. Not one measured in inheritance, but in impact. Not one tied to blood, but to choice. And maybe, just maybe, this was the kind of family I was meant to build next.